Landlord who owned building where fire killed 2 people had numerous fire code infractions across dozens of properties. Naheed Nenshi is running for leader of the Alberta NDP. Saltwire files for creditor protection. Boeing whistleblower found dead. And the Pope suggests that now is the time for Ukraine to negotiate peace with Russia. Good morning. It's Tuesday, March 12th. I'm Nora. Here are your headlines. We start this morning in Kingston, Ontario, where CBC's Dan Tekema has uncovered that the city coordinated an inspection blitz after a house fire that killed Bonnie DeMille and Autumn Crawley last year. The fire broke out on March 30th, 2023 on Montreal Street. The pair were both in the building when it burned. Less than a week after the fire, Kingston police said that the fire was not criminal in nature. But the landlord, Paul Dadiala, has been charged. He faces 9 charges. The buildings that he is the owner of didn't have portable fire extinguishers or working smoke alarms in all bedrooms, nor was there a working carbon monoxide detector. He's also been charged with failing to properly install fire resistance and separation devices in the hallways, doors, and exit stairways of the building's first floor. Nor was the exit door self-closing. Dadiala's family owned other rental properties as well, and there was insufficient fire protections in other properties too. It's also been alleged that there were more people living in his properties than there should have been. For example, one of his places was a single-family dwelling, but had been converted into a 3-unit apartment. And another property of Dadiala's caught on fire too, injuring a woman and 2 children, and that was just down the street from the fatal fire. Despite these facts, police still argued that the fire was not criminal in nature, nor was it caused by the landlord's negligence. Tekema found a lot of this information thanks to Freedom of Information requests, and it's not clear how many rental units the Dadiala family actually owned. It seemed that he owned some 37 rental properties across the city. Tekema could not get Dadiala to respond to a request to comment, even though he signed to accept a letter sent via registered mail with the questions on it. In the article, Tekema also talks with Bonnie's sister Melissa and her mother Alma, both of who, of course, are devastated by losing their daughter to this fire. Next to Alberta news. Naheed Nenshi has thrown his hat into the ring to lead the province's NDP. Nenshi is an outsider, kind of, to the party, though he's the former mayor of Calgary. The deadline to run closes in just 3 days. In the article from the Calgary Herald's Bill Kaufman and Michael Rodriguez, Nenshi says this, which is an objectively funny line. Quote, "We have 4 very capable women and someone else running, and I'm used to being the underdog. I have a lot of ground to make up," unquote. In case you're wondering, that someone else is current Alberta Federation of Labour President Gil McGowan, and the 4 women are Edmonton MPs Sarah Hoffman, Raki Pancholi, and Jody Calahoo Stonehouse, and Calgary MLA Kathleen Ganley. Nenshi is 52 years old. He was mayor of Calgary for 3 terms, and he says that he's running because he's genuinely scared of Danielle Smith. He also assured us that, quote, he can be pugilistic when required, unquote, which I will leave you to look up. Next to very bad news in Atlantic Canada for journalism. CBC News' Josh Hoffman reports that Saltwire owes nearly $100 million and has filed for creditor protection with the Supreme Court of Nova Scotia. Saltwire owns many newspapers out east, including the Halifax Chronicle Herald, the Cape Breton Post, the Telegram in St. John's, and the Guardian in Charlottetown. The biggest chunk of debt is owed to Fiera Private Debt, a company owned by Fiera International, which is an investment firm that has about $1.33 billion in assets. Saltwire owes $33 million to Fiera. They also owe $7 million to all of us. They haven't been paying HST, seemingly, and so they owe this money to CRA. Saltwire says that they can't pay what they owe. The article quotes Fiera saying that Saltwire, quote, has been demonstrably mismanaged, unquote. And perhaps in show of that mismanagement, the chief operating officer of Saltwire, Ian Scott, said that the process will, quote, enable us to emerge as a stronger, more vibrant media company, unquote, which is like, yeah, if you even have a company when this is over, buddy, I don't know. I'm not sure why you'd be talking like this, but good luck. Next, the BBC is reporting that John Barnett has been found dead. He was the whistleblower who told BBC that Boeing workers have been pressured to get substandard parts into the production line on the 787 Dreamliner assembly line. The Dreamliner is a massive plane. I got to take a lie-down flat Dreamliner seat once to Los Angeles because I got bumped up. It was totally wild. I've never had that happen in my life. It's the flagship plane of Boeing. Police say that Barnett died from a self-inflicted wound. Barnett had worked for Boeing for 32 years, and during the last 7 years that he worked for them, he was a quality manager in the North Charleston plant that made the Dreamliner. He said that he was concerned that the plane's oxygen systems had serious problems that would make 1 in 4 breathing masks not work during an emergency, reports BBC. Boeing denied all of Barrett's claims, but in 2017, the Federal Aviation Administration found that some of Barrett's concerns were real. From the article, quote, it established that the location of at least 53 non-conforming parts in the factory was unknown and that they were considered lost. Boeing was ordered to take remedial action, unquote. That was one of Barnett's claims. They also found that there were some oxygen bottles that were not deploying properly, but that weren't actually installed on an aircraft. Barnett was found dead in a hotel garage. He was in Charleston for legal questioning related to lawsuits that he was engaged in with Boeing. His death comes at a time where Boeing is under the spotlight for insufficiencies, including one FAA audit just last week that found that Boeing, quote, failed to comply with manufacturing quality control requirements, unquote. That, by the way, folks, is why you want your airplanes made by union labor. So shout out to all those IAM workers and everyone else who makes airplane components and who have a union who can formally blow the whistle on this stuff. And finally, Pope Francis has set off a firestorm within NATO after having called for Ukraine to, quote, have the courage of the white flag, unquote, to try and negotiate peace with Russia. Russia welcomed the comments, of course, and said that they would be open and have been open to peace talks. But Jens Stoltenberg, the head of NATO, argued that the only way towards peace was through preparing for war. Yes, that was a Martin Prince reference. But here is actually what he said. Quote, if we want a negotiated, peaceful, lasting solution, the way to get there is to provide military support to Ukraine. It's not the time to talk about surrender by the Ukrainians. That will be a tragedy for the Ukrainians. It will also be dangerous for all of us, because then the lesson learned in Moscow is that when they use military force, when they kill thousands of people, when they invade another country, they get what they want, unquote, he said. Man, no one tells Stoltenberg about the United States because they've certainly learned that lesson. They know that very well. Back in 2022, Volodymyr Zelensky signed a decree that said the country would not engage in peace talks with Russia. More recently, Ukraine said Russia would not be invited to a peace summit that's going to be held in Switzerland, reports Al Jazeera. There is more worried about the state of things in Ukraine, as Russia has advanced and is now controlling more than a sixth of Ukraine. But with the possibility of a Trump presidency, there are fears that the future of this war are not looking good for Ukraine. And the Pope is asking a question that many reasonable people have asked since the beginning of this. How many more deaths are worth all of this? Those are your headlines for Tuesday, March 12th. I'm Nora. It's Tuesday, it's Sandy and Nora Day. New episode drops in a couple of hours. Today we are talking about the discourse on the internet. Who owns what words and what are you allowed to say and what are you not allowed to say? And why we should be skeptical of anybody that says you can't say certain things because, Christ, we can say whatever we want. Like, who cares? Anyway, we go really deep into it. I think you'll like this episode. It'll be out in a couple of hours, as I just said. You are listening to this podcast at sandynora.com, on the Real News Network podcast feed, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Hope you have a wonderful day. While I was recording that, folks, my cat fell off the couch and absolutely stabbed me, so I'm going to have to deal with whatever hole I now have in my feet. I'll talk to you tomorrow.